goals. And he's also a wilderness rites of passage experience. He facilitates wilderness experiences as a guide and is one of our coach and facilitator associates. So welcome, Andy, and we are all very excited to hear about the conference and your own experience. So if you want to share with us just how was your trip to Egypt and how was the conference?
Thanks, Charisse. Yeah, I think today is going to be an exercise in navigating complexity, hopefully with clarity. Yeah, arriving in Cairo was quite confronting. I'd been to Egypt on 3 occasions before, but not to Cairo. And so landing in Cairo in the early hours and then going into the city was, I mean, it was a quite a fierce introduction. There's a lot of people, a lot of traffic, there's a lot of intensity. And to a point where it almost feels overwhelming and quite, I guess intense is the right word. And after I had a conversation with Lucille, and she sort of just steered me into observing the energy of the place as a very sort of Enneagram 8 type energy, which was so useful in starting to understand how to work with the environment. You know, it's interesting in that it's quite confronting. It at times seems quite abrasive, but at no point did I really feel any aggression. It was such a nice weave of this 8 energy, and you know, even the traffic. There's sort of like 4 or 6 lanes of traffic trying to fit into 4 lanes, and yet it somehow still works. There doesn't seem to be any aggression at all, and there's an immense amount of safety. You know, at no point did I feel unsafe, and I was walking into all kinds of corridors and things at night, dodging cats and markets and all kinds of things. So yeah, and then the people in the conference are incredibly warm. There's this receptivity, there's this enthusiasm, and of course there's this deep mysticism that is sort of associated with Egypt and with Cairo, and that really comes through. It really came through in the conference. And I hadn't been to an Enneagram conference before, and what's so useful about it is the deep immersion. I mean, you just get immersed into this environment of insight and activity and excitement and intensity, and they're big lunch halls where everyone sits with each other and everyone's interacting and talking, and there's so much on the go. So it's a little bit like trying to drink from a fire hydrant. So hopefully I've got something useful to share from this. What I've decided to do is not sort of go or not lean too heavily into the traditional personality Enneagram, but actually draw a bit more on the sort of Sufi and mystical influences that came up. And a lot of that was quite new to me, but it's certainly what attracted me to Cairo and to this conference. So what I've decided to do is lean on or glean from 4 speakers, which is Russ Hudson, and then Marion Gilbert, and Khalid El Shabini, and Dina El Bradry. And those 4, I was able to draw quite an interesting thread through all of them. And a lot of them relied on the Enneagram as a map, not so much as a typing tool. And in fact, you know, if we can sort of start moving into Russ Hudson, and I'll just start sharing my screen.
And I just wanted to say, you know, as you presenting your findings and your sharings, that if people have questions or comments, to pop them in the chat group, in the chat box, sorry, and then I will manage those as we get to a point of sharing and clarification. So yeah, happy to do that once as we go through the presentation. Back to you.
I'll do what I can to answer. A lot of this is interesting to me because it's new understanding, and I find a lot of it incredibly complex and sort of testament to Russ leading from a 5. The the talk he delivered was incredibly broad and massively deep. But yeah, to start with Russ, you know, he comes to Cairo every year, and he leads a 3-week immersion into ancient Egypt. So he really has a very deep understanding of what's there. And of course, he's a world-renowned name. The first book I ever read concerning the Enneagram was The Wisdom of the Enneagram, which he co-authored. So it was really fantastic to meet him, to see him in person. It's a great opportunity to kind of sit back and just really drink in his knowledge. So his talk was on working with the traditional laws behind the Enneagram. And he opened by saying, the Enneagram does not tell us who we are, but what we most need to be aware of to mature into our true purpose. And he was quite explicit about this, is that the Enneagram is never meant to be a typology. It really is a map of process, and specifically the process of waking up, developing attention, and crossing a civilizational threshold. So he was emphatic that people who say that I am a 5 or I am a 6 or I'm a 9 are missing the point. Your type is not what you are. It's a specific shape that your attention gets stuck in. So just a recap here, which wasn't part of his talk, but it is useful because it comes up quite a lot through the talks, is just an understanding of how our holy ideas and virtues manifest through contraction. So when we lose our touch with our holy ideas and that contraction becomes a fixation in our head center, the virtues then, when they contract, they're fixated as passions in our heart center. So, to familiarize ourselves again just with the holy ideas, these are them here: holy love, holy perfection, holy will and freedom, holy law, holy hope, etc. Now, when those contract, how they manifest is in these ways. So 9 into indolence, 1 into resentment, 2 into flattery, and so forth. Virtues, on the other hand, these are our virtuous selves, and then contracting into passion. So just to familiarize ourselves again with what these are, because they will come up through the talks. Now, where Russ kind of led his talk from was looking at these traditional laws, or working with the traditional laws behind the Enneagram. And he started with the law of 1, which is represented in the Enneagram by the circle. So this is wholeness, this is completeness, this is coming home. It's unity, it's belonging. The circle says, come back, you are held in unity, you are part of it. It cannot be otherwise. Any Enneagram work that does not lead to a sense of wholeness and unity is not the real Enneagram. From here, we move into the law of 3. And this law of 3 is, I would say, the most central part of all the talks I attended. It's really interesting to see how, particularly the main stage speakers, use this law of 3. Type is a later consideration, if considered at all. So often entry points are through instinctual centers or through laws of 3, not so much through type in the talks that I attended. So this is what the law of 3 looks like as it shows up on the Enneagram. These are different forces at play. So we can think of one force as being no or deny. The other side of this is yes or affirming. So we might understand this as polarity or tension. We can see it across the lines in the Enneagram of personality, 1 and 7, 2 and 8, etc. And the work here is often to be able to hold tension. So when we hold tension, we give birth to a third reconciling force. The Egyptians believe that multiplicity comes from forces of 3. So moving a bit more into ancient Egypt and what is represented there and how that law of 3 permeates through time is Russ looked at 3 different deities. So he looked at Set, which is our instinctual nature. That's how he's represented. Horus, who's our higher awareness. And then the third reconciling force is Isis, sensitive, compassionate, holding awareness. Now, the mythology goes is that Isis was wife to Osiris. Set, as his brother, became jealous and killed him. Isis then put him back together, remembered him, and he became king of the underworld. When she put him back together through remembering, she gave birth at that point to Horus, his son. So then she kept him in secret and raised him, and then he was to confront Horus. The work that she did and that she enabled with him was that not that he destroyed Set, but that he came back riding on him. And that is the kind of the union that they're talking about in these forces of three. So Horus is our higher awareness, Set is our instinctual nature, and then this Isis, which is sensitive, compassionate, and holding awareness. Now, what Russ is telling us here is that this third force cannot be forced. It comes through presence. And this was central to his talk around presence. When we lose presence is when we collapse out of holy ideas, or we collapse out of our virtues. When we are present, and he speaks about this energy called B-A, which is this winged energy and attention that floats through us all the time. When we contract it, that's when our ego takes place. There's a contraction of that free-flowing attention. Now, what happens with this is that we can't force this, but we must hold it. We must be able to hold tension, hold polarity to give birth to reconciling forces. He says, working with our type, we can begin by noting that what our type identifies with tends to be active. Our denying force is what we avoid. This is often our shadow. So these are the affirming forces that we find through our personality types. And these are the denying ones. Again, the work is not to push one away. There's affirming and denying. Like, can we hold both in equanimity to then give rise to that third force? And it really is the holding. It is not efforting. It is not pulling apart. It's not pushing together. It's a peace and harmony held with jealousy and enragement. Order and goodness held with irrational and the chaotic. Caring and connection held with selfish and bitter. We need both sides of a pole to give birth to the third force. As he says, the higher meets the lower and resolves in the middle. For this to occur, that which is active in us must become actively receptive. The reconciling force is always a turn towards our divine source and requires sensitive receptivity. And then looking onto the law of seven. So I was quite confused when I first saw this as a law of seven, as a six-sided hexagon shape. But the way that it is traced is, if we start at where one would be, moving to 4, moving to 2, moving to 8, moving to 5, moving to 7, and then returning to 1, makes the 7. So 7 is the number of change and dynamism in Egyptian numerology, and I'm sure the 7s would agree with me in the room. And it's quite interesting here when we start looking at the mathematical side of the Enneagram, that the points of the Enneagram hexad are created by multiples of 1 divided by 7. So if you divide 1 by 7, we get 0.142857114. And that is the direction that the lines move in. 1 moves to 4, 4 moves to 2, 2 moves to 8, 5 moves to 7, 7 moves to 1. When you divide 2 by 7, we get the same sequence, but just started a few multiples later. So now we're starting at 2, 2 move into 8, 5, 7, 1, 4, 2, and so forth. 3 starts at 4, 4 starts at 5, 5 starts at 7, 6 starts at 8, and 7 but divided by 7 would be 1. So now when we put all these together, we get the Enneagram symbol, which is 3 threes considered a complete set. So this is where it got quite interesting. This is a step into the process Enneagram, which is distinctly different from the Enneagram of personality. In fact, there's very little correspondence besides the symbol. So the way that Russ explained it is that it's like an octave, and the process Enneagram is used to map processes. So if we assign the octave to the points, we start with Do, which is 0.9, Re, Mi, Fa, So, La, and Si. In modern language or interpretation, the C is pronounced T, I think that is just from what I've read, a sort of an upgrade so that there's no repeating initial letter in the sequence. What you'll notice here as well is that there is nothing at 0.3 and 0.6. And so what those are considered are shock points. So if we look at those on the scale of a piano, we can see the do, re, mi shock point, fa, sol, la, ti, si, do shock point. And this is where it starts to get very five-ish. So what happens here, if we look at this as a process Enneagram, is we have a new idea that sort of enters at 9. It's an idea that sort of surfaces from perhaps nowhere indiscernible. And then we'd move around from re to me. So this idea, say I decide that it's a new year and I'm going to start going to the gym. There's an impulse to do this. And I get all my gear and I get ready and I'm inspired and I start going to the gym. But then after a few weeks, I lose the motivation to do it. Something stops me. I can't get past a point. This is when we hit these shock points. Now, what happens at a shock point is that we can't continue around a process on our own. We need an external force to help us. In the case of a gym, it might be a personal trainer, or it might be a friend that says, I'll come with you. And so we often need something else to elevate us beyond that. When we start to look at it as octaves supporting each other. So in the inner circle here, the do as a new idea will enter and move around to me, or to re, mi, and then hit this shock point. When that external force comes in, it starts a new octave and starts moving up. So this one will move from do to re to mi and hit a shock point here. So as you're moving across these things, when you hit 0.6, it's like 2 shocks hitting simultaneously, the first octave and the second octave. And a new do starts moving around. So a way to try and visualize this is like a DNA helix spiral moving upwards, except it keeps adding more chains to it. And this is how Gurdjieff looked at process work. Russ took us through a whole movement exercise and also showed a video of how this is practiced as a movement, which is incredibly complex. It's useful just to start, for me certainly, just to start entertaining this idea of how the Enneagram can also be used as a symbol for process and how that starts to look. What is particularly interesting about this was that Russ said that he thinks that we as a civilization are at this C-do shock point where we are able to see what is possible potentially on the other side, and also the opposite of that, our downfall. And the thinking here, and what he said, is that he thinks that the Enneagram has arrived in our lives at this time and has been reinvigorated in this time in order to help us get through that shock point. And that is through a process of reconciliation through presence. So this diagram, when it's a process Enneagram and moving from 9 to 1 to 2 through shock point 3, 4, 5, shock point 6, 7, 8, back to 9, is all good and well, and that's what a process looks like from the outside. However, processes don't run linearly. And this is where the internal system shows us how it works. And this is the law of 7 coming into play. So the 1 moves to 4, moves to 2, and you can see that shock point that it hits there. 2 moves to 8, 8 moves to 5, and then again, as 5 moves to 7, hits that shock point before returning to 1. So I've done this a slight injustice in depth because it is quite a mind-bending topic, I found. And I watched his talk and I watched him explain this, and I spent, I don't know how many hours trying to understand it, trying to make sense of the different shock points and this upward spiraling helix. And I think I've roughly got the concept, but I'm also aware that there is a vast amount more to understand about it. Anyway, it was a very interesting way to start using the symbol in a different way that I'm used to, which is just the Enneagram of personality, really. You're on mute, Therese.
Thank you. Sorry about that. The way Russ connected the Enneagram back to these ancient ideas, was there anything that connected for you, that you connected with, that shifted how you understand working with your own type?
Yeah, I think what was really encouraging and significant here was just the leveraging of a mindfulness-based approach. It really is a strong kind of foundation that I use in my work around presencing, and I have been particularly interested in polarity. So it was so good to see that come up, to see this work with polarity, and I've been looking at it through the lens of type, but to look at it through history and how it's showing up, and then of course in the subsequent talks as well. So it's really enlivened my work with polarity, and particularly in teams, and when there's conflict, to know what's possible on the other side of that conflict, if it can be held in balance, and if we bring awareness to it.
Yeah, and that's an invitation to hold both those polarities, because I think human nature is we want to swing to the one or to the other, and not kind of, hold both. And that can be the challenging part. I also find it interesting that Russ brought in your musical notes, because he's also a musician, I think. So it made sense that came in. But yeah, it is quite an advanced system that you're explaining there.
Yeah, he said he was a musician until he found the Enneagram.
Okay. Right. Any questions or reflections from yeah, they're coming through. Adrian asking, did Russ give any practical examples he had used of the process work?
No, he didn't go into practical examples there. It was really I think a more sort of a theoretical session. It was it felt quite heady. I mean, he spoke a lot around presence and the qualities required to birth this third reconciling force. But yeah, I had a lot in my head coming out of that session.
And yeah, and I think that's interesting. Claudia is saying she did not understand the shock points. And I think, that is also, I don't know if you've got more to share on that, the shock points.
Yeah. I mean, they're typical points in a process, or obstacles in a process where we get stuck. And it's using the Enneagram as a map. So if we consider it as a map, and we really have to let go of type here, but just to see it as steps in a process. When in almost all processes, we hit an obstacle where the way that we've been doing things won't get us across that barrier. It's almost like that adage of the mind that created a problem is not the mind that can solve it. You need a kind of a higher intelligence or a different perspective. And so it's just noting how that happens in processes and in projects. As that when that happens and you notice that happen, it's an opportunity to call on a higher force. Later, when I speak about Dina's talk, she says that some people turn to prayer, or looking for divine guidance here. So it can be anything from a coach to a spiritual relationship that can help you get over that shock point.
Yeah, great. And I think as we go through the other speakers, something might connect, and more clarity around these shock points and polarities that come up.
Therese?
Yes.
I can't, for some reason, I cannot type into the chat or the Q&A, but I just wanted to make a comment to the group that Eric Lyleson's work on essential wholeness really brings in this process work, and he maps the hero's journey around from 9 back to 9. And the shock point is where you need a mentor to come in. So it's quite aligned. He doesn't talk about shock points, but I thought that folks might find that an interesting other reference that's aligned. So I don't know who's familiar with Eric's work and Essential Wholeness, but when I first read that book, I was like, wow, this takes it all to another level.
Thanks so much for
this
coming.
is, I was just going to say this the spiraling map using octaves, and that is Gurdjieff's work. So this is what he worked with the Enneagram. So he didn't look at personality at all. It was Oscar Ichazo who then brought that aspect of it in. So this is really kind of pure Gurdjieffian mapping.
Thanks.
Thanks, Melissa. Just share that name again, please, if you don't mind, because you can't type in the chat box.
Eric Lyleson, he's in Australia, and his book is, I think it's called Essential Wholeness, or the Enneagram of Essential Wholeness. I think he's spoken at some, well, he certainly does speak at some conferences, but don't know if he's ever spoken at the International Enneagram conferences.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Thanks for sharing that. So we're moving on to Marion Gilbert, Andy, and yeah, like how was her session like, coming out of Russ's session into hers?
Well, Marion actually didn't follow on from him. She was on the Saturday morning and Russ was on the Sunday morning, but I just found their pairing quite interesting. So Marion leads from an 8, and you could really feel that on the stage and how her presentation was. And I've also known of her for a long time. She's really deeply immersed in the sort of somatic work and looking at the Enneagram. And what she leads with or her thesis on the Enneagram is that it's not primarily a mental pattern. And in fact, it's an energetic contraction that is held in the physical structure and often formed before the age of 3. And she says that transformation doesn't happen by the little I deciding to change. It happens when you witness transformation, which requires going down, not up. She calls it the descent into the catacombs of our being. And it's the most difficult and most necessary invitation we have. She led with this quote from Krishnamurti. It says, "If you begin to understand what you are without trying to change it, then what you are undergoes a transformation." So there's this theme of non-efforting and rather holding that keeps coming through. The holding the two sides of the poles, the affirming and the denying. And again, she's saying here is to be witness, to be present. And this theme seems to be core to this Enneagram conference. So she then looked at the laws of 3 again. So in Gurdjieff, we have the affirming, the denying, and the reconciling. In the Enneagram, we look at those as receptivity, reactivity, and integration. And then in neurobiology, there's an attraction, an aversion, and neutral. We sit at rest. In somatic practice, we have expansion, contraction, and calibration. So this image here was taken from a kind of an awkward seat in the auditorium, but she used this to explain to us the different forces that are at play. So perhaps we can do this together now. So what she did was this exercise of standing. And the first part of this is to sit forward on your chair and just to notice the weight of gravity in your feet, this downward pull. Feel the weight of your feet pushing into Mother Earth. And she said that the Earth is actually the only secure attachment we have. And now if you move from this into a standing position, so you just use your upward force to stand up, be present to that. And notice that you are being lifted. You're not the one standing. You are being stood up by vertical forces. So what are these forces? This is our fascia tensile properties, our fluid hydraulics, and our skeletal architecture. So we are being stood up. And then from here, she invited us to start shifting our weight around. So you can shift your weight into your left foot. Shift your weight into your right foot. You take a step back, a step forward. So you discover you can move in any direction. You're a vertical being walking horizontally in this world. So she's saying when you consciously inhabit both vertical forces simultaneously, you arrive in grounded presence. This third thing, this felt sense of being held, arises when the two forces are allowed to meet. So this is the law of three being made physical. And what this image helps us understand is that we have the levity that's driving us up. We have the gravity that's pulling us down. And then we have these intertwining sine waves. Move this way, so, and this way. One is moving up with levity, one is moving down with gravity. On the left, we have contracted, and on the right, we have expanded. See when, and where these lines cross, the first cross is at our crown, the second cross is at our throat, the third cross is at our solar plexus, and the fourth cross is at our pelvic floor. So where these lines cross and expand are these expansive areas of ourselves, our head, our heart center, and our gut. When we allow these things to expand, so we allow the holy idea to expand with the fixation. We allow our passion and our virtue to expand. We allow our defensive instinct and our nourishing instinct to expand. This is where reconciliation happens. It's not about only being in the holy ideas, only being in the virtue, only being in the nourishing instinct. That is too far onto one pole. We want to hold all of who we are. Nothing is out of place. We expand into it. When we expand with fixation and holy idea, we become open-minded. There's mindfulness. When we expand our heart through passion and virtue, we become open-hearted and we become compassionate. And when we expand our body through our defensive instinct and our nourishing instinct, we experience grounded presence. So she goes on to say that reactivity and receptivity are both needed. There's quite an interesting pushback that she has on reactivity as being bad and receptivity being good. Because both are needed. At times we need to be reactive. If our life's a threat or if we have to get out of the way of something like that, we need that reactivity to kick in. And it's about allowing both. Both are fully allowed in the field. And when they are, this integration arises automatically, this third force. So we have these defensive instincts that are in our system and they happen for us, but we often don't allow them to play out. So we have fight, we have flight, and we have freeze. And instead of these playing out, our cognitive mind gets in the way and intervenes and prevents these cycles from completing. And when it does, this defensive energy stays locked as a chronic contraction. So if fight is allowed to play out, it becomes play in life force, free physical expression. If flight is allowed to play out, it gives rise to curiosity and the impulse to explore. And freeze, seeking of contact and connection, the heart softens and opens. And these are just more examples of that avoidance and essence happening within us at any one time. Conflict, all-encompassing wisdom, empowerment, weakness, wrong, bad, purity, one's own needs, altruism. Just noticing the different sides of that polarity and what it's like to start holding that. She said to us that when she was going through her divorce, she was really, really struggling. She didn't know what to let go of, what to hold on to. She didn't know what she was holding on to, if she could let go. And she went to see a Maori healer that said to her, you don't have to let go. You just have to let be, which is that, that third force coming into to play. Just let be, and it starts to resolve. If we go back to looking at this avoidance in essence, she got us to do an interesting exercise, which is to stand up and just to try and experience the different feelings of the sides of the pole, the different, the breadth of the polarity. So with 9s, the contraction is around conflict. The felt sense that if tension enters my field, I'll lose my ground and my peace. The somatic pattern is a numbing, a diffusion of energy so that nothing lands too sharply. When you can breathe and allow that friction to exist without disappearing from yourself, what opens is this all-encompassing wisdom. It's a genuine holding of everything, including contradiction, without losing coherence. 1, we have the polarity of wrong and bad into purity. So the contraction begins around being wrong or bad, the felt sense of something incoherent being judged and invalidated. What happens with the 1s, the body braces, tightens, holds everything in place so that nothing incorrect can slip through. When you breathe into and around that held structure without correcting it, what opens is purity. Not moral perfection, but the original uncorrupted clarity of being that was there before the judgment landed. With 2s, the contraction around one's own needs. The felt sense that if I acknowledge what I need, I'll lose the love I've secured by being needed. The body orientates outward towards the other, while the interior is hollowed out. When you can breathe into that vacated interior space and feel the needs that are actually there, what opens is genuine altruism, generosity that comes from fullness rather than from depletion. The 3s with failure and all-encompassing wisdom, the contraction around failure, the felt sense that if I stop performing, I'll be revealed as worthless. The body becomes an instrument of drive and output. The heart gets skipped. When you can breathe into the stillness underneath the drive and risk the feeling of stopping, what opens is all-accomplishing wisdom, the discovery that real accomplishment flows from presence, not from the ego's frantic motion. For 4s, the contraction around orderliness. The felt sense that if there's nothing uniquely significant about my experience, I don't really exist. The body holds a pulling inward, an ache, a longing. When you can breathe into that longing without amplifying it, and let yourself simply be here, what opens is primordial source, the discovery that your origin is not personal specialness, but something far deeper, and you are never separate from it. 5s contract around not knowing, being lost in an anti-void, not even knowing if you exist. When you breathe around and behind the eyes, and into the space between the pituitary and the pineal gland, something opens. A substance that is empty of content, but not empty energetically. Crystal clear like a blue cloudless sky. Marion called this the expanse. The 6 is the deep fear of uncertainty, the startling shock that taught the nervous system that uncertainty is dangerous. The attention gets pulled away and up from the belly. And when you can feel the sense both sides of the dualistic mind at the same time, the non-dual wisdom surfaces. Seeing beyond the fear, having access to a mind capable of opening itself without contracting. With 7s, limitation and resource, the existential terror of being trapped, limited in a body that is in pain, locked and contracted to the pelvic floor. The strategy is flight into the light, pulling energy up and out, but learning to embrace the pelvic floor, contraction, and simultaneously reach up with the crown while dropping down with the pelvic floor, elongating, to feel the presence of your whole being as your resource. And the 8s, the deep sense of weakness, exposure, vulnerability, and powerlessness, the contraction right above the pelvic floor in the belly center, where you can breathe around it and reclaim the innocence. The structure softens, life force moves freely, and you're empowered by something way, way bigger than you. So that was Marion's talk.
I love the flow from Russ into Marion, and there's these connection aspects that are coming up for me. But I think it might be quite useful to have a breakout room where people can reflect on just what has been shared for so far. Yeah, what do you suggest?
Yeah, if there are any questions, I can answer 1 or 2 of those, and then we can go into a breakout.
Yeah, I think there's just like a concentrated wisdom from Claudia. I think when you were describing the contraction and expansion of Marion, Diane says it sounds like Tai Chi.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, it's an embodied practice. It's, she had us all stand in and talking us through breathing into those different spaces. So for the 5, to try find that space between your pituitary and your pineal gland and breathe into it to see if you can like realize this blue open space. And she had a lot of, there's a lot of movement. So the 2, when it's doing its contraction, is giving all of its energy away. And the other side of it is to resource itself. So there was lots of movement. It was really good. It was nice to be able to stand up and move and step forward and back and up and down, and yeah, it was very, very dynamic.
Yeah, just doing that exercise that you put us through in terms of standing up and those external forces versus, Russ's session that felt also quite heady, speaks to the different energies of the head types versus the body types.
Yeah, and just the idea of hydraulic fluid being our sort of levitating force is fascinating, I thought. That we are being stood.
Yeah, something to think about, sure. I see no other questions are coming out, some reflections. Okay. But what we can do is have a 10-minute breakout room, and then when we come back, Lucille also recorded her debrief of the conference. So we've got a little snippet of a video to share where Lucille talks about her experience too, about what she attended and viewed at the conference. So once we come back from the breakout room, we'll go into that.
Cool.
So the question for the breakout room is, where does your attention tend to get taken right now, today in your life? And when you notice it's been taken, what brings you back? Do you want to say more about that, Andy?
Yeah, so just I think from what Russ has said, and just the conversations around polarity, and then the felt sense of that through what Marion has spoken about. So just notice where you might lean to one pole more than the other, where your perspective might be limited by being on one side rather than the other. And yeah, just that discussion around where does your attention go? And to use this moment is as good as any, right? It's like, right now, where's your attention? What is it thinking of? Where is it going? And then when you notice that, what brings it back?
Welcome back, everybody. I hope it sounds like some of you had really good, fun chats with the laughter. Yeah, anybody who would like to just share what came up for them from their discussion? Diane?
It was divine. It was so serendipitous. We both had the same tri-type, and we could share. And it was really precious and enlightening and mirroring and grounding. And I'd really like to connect with you again. I think we've got a lot to create together.
Fantastic. Thanks, Diane. Anybody else have an insight or share what came up for them?
Sure.
Wow, I'm amazed at the intuitiveness of this because I didn't feel like I raised my hand. But we just had this incredible encounter in that Ilka Dunn and I were at university together in the early 90s, and we haven't seen each other since then. We did our honours year together. And she's a 873, 738, and I'm a 459, so all withdrawn, all reserved. But there we were, like 33 years later. So it was quite wild.
And I'm going to have to get your email address, Joe. Seeing you just Joe.
Yes, sorry, I had a bit of technical issues today. My laptop is in the shop and whatever, so I'm kind of scrabbling about on my phone.
I think kind of what stood out for me, and it was kind of during my start of the conversation before we worked out where we knew each other from, was finding connection for me has been, and like a moment of pause for me has been going back to some of those very human things. So meeting Joe and just having a reconnection moment seemed like this absolutely serendipitous experience, considering the topic.
Yeah.
Mm.
Thanks, Ilka and Joe. Yeah, it's amazing. Sure, what a nice connection. I see other Joe has you have your hand up. Would you like to share, Joe?
Sure. So I was chatting to Anna. We didn't actually get to the question. We were having such a nice conversation about what Andrew had been presenting, and I suppose the one thing that jumped out for me is we were talking about the doing and the being, and that presence. And you explained it so nicely when you started with your triangles, Andrew, and I can't quite explain how you said it, but Anna said to me, as a non-English speaker, can you explain more about what you mean about doing and being? She was saying, I understand in English the difference between doing and being, but explain it. It was so interesting for me to have to then think about how to explain that. And what I actually meant by saying less doing and more being in terms of me and my Enneagram 3 wanting to always be moving and achieving. And so it was such a useful reflection for me to actually say, what does that really mean? And I suppose that the being word came back to the words around being curious as opposed to trying to, being curious and observe and reflect on things as opposed to, that doing thing. So anyway, it was a lovely conversation. As I say, we didn't get to the question, but it was also some interesting serendipity. But maybe, Andrew, you said something about, I was trying to explain it to Anna where, I can't even explain it badly, but where you wanting to do something, but you only actually achieve that when you stop trying to do it. You were talking about that triangle. Maybe you can say that again. It was so powerful.
Forget exactly what I said there, but it's between affirming and denying forces.
Yes.
And sort of holding in polarity. So in that Horus set thing, they had the higher self and our base instincts. So our self-praise, our sexual, our social, which are kind of active. Those are like active energies in the thing. And the higher self wants to push those down because it doesn't want to be driven by these base instincts. Only when we can hold those in balance. So we're not trying to push one away and lean to the other. We're just holding onto both. The mere act of holding gives birth to that third force. So that is, it's being, or perhaps you could call it non-efforting or allowing. It really is the work of just being able to hold without favoring, without leaning to the other. There's an explanation that Khalid used, and I'll speak to him now, a metaphor used around walking a tightrope, which might go some way to explaining that.
Thank you.
Sure.
Right, thanks for all the sharings. Shall we move to playing Lucille's video now, and then we can go on with your sharing. Okay, so I'm going to share the video now. Just bear with me for a second. Okay.
Hi there, Enneagram community. It's Lucille here. Apologies for not being able to be at the community of practice session, but I wanted to also share some of my experience of the conference in Egypt. First and foremost, I want to just put a shout out there to Rania and Maggie and the rest of the IEA Egypt conference organizing committee. I think they did such a wonderful job to make all of us feel welcome. And 4 of the continents were represented. Very few people that presented did so in their first language. So obviously a lot of Arabic speaking presenters, Spanish speaking presenters. And it was really lovely to just be together as a community and to experience Egyptian hospitality. So thank you so much for hosting us. It was absolutely wonderful, and I can highly recommend for those of us, especially that are in, for example, Europe, Africa. It's a lovely conference to go to. We stay in the same time zone. It is, I think, more affordable than going to some of the other global conferences in our community. And I know they are intending to host another conference 2 years from now. If I look at the conference overall, what I really appreciated about the conference is really a key focus through all the presentations that brought us to the question over and over again, why do we work with the Enneagram? We do not work with the Enneagram to understand 9 types of people. This invitation that the Enneagram invites us towards presence, towards being in the here and now, and to be awake in how we are showing up to our lives in the world, really ran as a golden thread for me throughout all of the presentations. I think sometimes we get so wrapped up in the theory of the 9 types, or the law of 1, the law of 3, the law of 7, whatever it is, that we forget the core invitation, which is towards presence and awareness. And many of the conference presenters brought that to us. So some thoughts in that vein. The Enneagram does not tell us who we are, but what we most need to be aware of to mature into our true purpose. The Enneagram shows us the pathway to that presence. It does not define us. And in a similar way, one of the sessions I went to by Mona around the formation of childhood scripts and how we can reparent ourselves as adults really reminded us that the 9 types were ways to look at the scripts we have for life, but not the true self in terms of that. And the way in which we worked with the scripts in that session is to say, I am, how do I see myself? How do I see others? Others are. How do I see the world? The world is. And therefore, how do I need to show up? Who do I need to be? How does the world work? It's almost a magical belief. So the way I see myself, the way I see others, the way I see the world, and the magical belief that comes from my Enneagram type that helps me have my needs met. And how do we become more fluid again in ourselves over time? I know that Andy's sharing a lot about different sessions that he attended. I wanted to share a little bit more about the experience that Simon and I had facilitating our session. And our session was really focused at the conference on the space between 2 colleagues at work. So it was called From Friction to Flow, the space between colleagues where the real work gets done. And what we did was to put our working relationship as Lucille and Simon in the spotlight for people to create a kind of a learning lab environment in which we were not so much the presenters, but the subjects of inquiry. And what we then shared, and I'll just share one or two of the slides here to give you an idea of how we set it up. We set up the idea of a third entity. So in between the space between Simon and I, we've been working together for a decade roughly. there is this third entity called our collegial relationship. And that third entity has certain patterns that it is attuned to and that it expresses, that is not from Simon or from myself. And what we did is we set up in the room, together with an Enneagram mat, we set up an empty chair to represent that third entity. And we shared some of our colleagues' report with people to look at the core motivations of our types. And this is the Enneagram spread that comes up when you put our two profiles together. And we got the group to look at this together with what our dominant and blind instincts are. And then we invited people to notice certain patterns, and a pattern that really got noticed a fair amount is how there's low 9 energy. And we had a number of Enneagram 9s in the group that were thinking about us and how we work together. And we also spoke about sharing an instinct stack from dominant sexual instincts to low self-preservation instincts. Both of us have that. And when we got people to sit in the chair, it was really a moment of deep embodied presence where people, having grappled in and related to the field, the third entity between us, then got an opportunity to sit in that chair and speak to us. And we took turns to sit in the chair. And what really struck me about this is how visceral and potent inviting someone outside of a collegial relationship to step into the third entity can be. People would go and sit in that chair and say, oh, wow, I have an experience of wanting to straighten my spine, or, this is what the Enneagram 9 energy wants to say to you right now around being kind and slowing down. And in some way, the experience of reversing roles and also allowing people to have a real impactful experience of the third entity and what we mean there created an opportunity for us to grow, for Simon and I to grow, but I think also really brought home this idea of what it means to coach the relationship and how that is different to coaching an individual in some kind of way. So that was really wonderful. I enjoyed some of the more kind of creative projects that were at the conference as well. The 4 Sacred Portals work that Roxanne Howe-Murphy and her team are busy with, and some of the interactive VR-enabled experiences were also very potent. And I hope that if you get to go to a conference soon, that you'll experience some of that. And then just a real sense of community, of global allyship that we experienced, and some really great drumming and hospitality overall. I know that Andy will share more from the other sessions, but yeah, just a real invitation for us to remember that when we work with the Enneagram, it's about presence, not about type. And as we relate from a more and more embodied place, which is the gift of what we can bring when we're working in the space between humans. These days, I think there's all kinds of technology-enabled coaching and Enneagram insight that's also there. But in the space between us, a real somatic, body-based practice can be incredibly potent. And in that space, we fall into grace. We don't strive to reach a state of maturity or enlightenment. It allows us to fall into grace and to really experience ourselves and each other with kindness. So thanks so much, and enjoy the rest of this presentation and session with Andy.
Great. Lucille couldn't join Andy today, and because she is training the level 1 training, but also just nice to hear a little bit of a what do you call it, a link from what Andy, what you've shared and what Lucille is sharing now in terms of the language and the impact of the conference as well. Sounds really exciting. So yeah, happy to move on to the next speaker, or do we want some reflections first?
Either.
Let's move on and see if there's more maybe questions after this. So you went to Khaled Al-Shabini's session, and he brought a Sufi lens to the Enneagram. And how was that experience for you, Andy?
Andy, before you start, can we just check whose mic is on, because there's this constant kind of feedback and it's quite disturbing.
Okay, let me see if I can just mute. Thank you for highlighting that. I've just muted everybody now. You can come off mute if you want to ask a question.
Yeah, so Khaled was the first real invigorating introduction to the Enneagram for me. He facilitated a module in integral theory course that I was doing on the Enneagram. And if anyone's met him before, I think they'll agree that he speaks in parables. I mean, it's like reading a Paulo Coelho novel, the way he sort of unfolds his thinking. So it's really captivating, and it's rich, and it's quite difficult then to pluck parts of his talk out while still keeping the context. It is interesting that he comes from a science background. He has a PhD in aeronautical engineering, and I think he worked as a rocket scientist for many years until he realized that work had no heart, and then went into constellation work and found the Enneagram, and now is a fundamental and founding member of Enneagram Egypt. And so I've wanted to meet him in person for a long time, so it's really cool to be able to see him, and that's what's so great about going to a conference, is you get to meet the, we want to call them the rock stars of the Enneagram world. I don't know if that's a good term, but it's so great to have access to mentors and people that have really invested in deepening their knowledge and sharing it with us. So both Khaled and Dina, who I'll speak about next, come at this, well, their talks in the conference were very Sufi influenced, which I thought was quite interesting as well. I don't know a lot about Sufism, but I was interested to see how this came through and how it was part of the Enneagram. So, as I said, Khaled speaks like he's teaching a parable, and he started with just exploring myth as a mirror. And so what he said is, science speaks to the mind that measures, myth speaks to the consciousness that participates. Science wants to remove the human observer. The observer studies the universe. It seeks objective truth and creates reliability. Myth begins when human observer is included. The universe studies itself through the human. It seeks existential truth and gives meaning. Science asks, what happened? How did it happen? Can we measure it? Science asks, under what condition can it repeat? Can it be tested and verified? Whereas myth asks, what does it reveal about existence, about being human, about suffering, death, love, order, and chaos? And do you recognize yourself in it? So it says, long before we spoke of energy, gender, myths, or psychology, human beings noticed the universal rhythms. The tide that moves in and moves out. The sun that rises and sets. The inhale and the exhale that signal life. The heart that contracts and the heart that expands. Across thousands of years, cultures have given names to these movements. This is the language of polarity. So we see Isis and Osiris. We see Shiva and Shakti, yin and yang, sky and earth, creation and destruction, mercy and justice, love and beloved. Jalal and Jamal, which are beauty and majesty. And these are the Sufi archetypes that he's using in this talk. So he says every human carries two currents, a masculine and a feminine one. Your Enneagram type is what happens when you lean too far into one and lose the other. Jalal, majesty, this is the masculine current. This current carries boundaries, it carries structure and strength. It's about standing firm. Think of a mountain. Jamal, this is beauty, the feminine current, connection, softness, receptivity, flow. Think of a river. Kamal is wholeness. And this is what emerges when both currents mature and meet. It's not a destination, but a dynamic balancing. It's a verb, not a noun. He says, when Jalal walks without Jamal, it becomes restless. When Jamal walks with Jalal, it becomes mushy. Wholeness appears only when both bow to the truth together. And it's interesting to reflect on this. You know, the more contemporary language I've heard around it is that if you're all spine and no heart, you're a tyrant. If you're all heart and no spine, you're a pushover. So integrate the two together. And I think this is what an age-old Sufi lesson is bringing through here. Kamal can only appear when Jamal is no longer compulsive, and Jalal is no longer defensive. So our inner masculine, the Jalal qualities and sensations. What he invited us to do for this was to stand up, and if you feel like joining me, you can do that, is in standing, and embody the posture of a mountain. So what does it feel like to stand as a mountain? He invites these qualities of clarity, form, structure, direction, protection, stillness, agency, transcendence, and consciousness. To really feel the solidity of this posture. The sensations that might come up are groundedness, steadiness, a sense of focus, linear, inviting symbols of a mountain or a spine, a line or crest of a wave. The colors associated with this are white, gold, and blue. Witness where it lives in your body. And then we have the inner feminine, Jamal qualities and sensations. So the metaphor for this is a river. And from here, he said, move like a river. See how this changes. See how you can move if you start to flow and start to sway. Notice how your body changes. Notice how different sensations come into play. So what might be here are qualities like flow, receptivity, warmth, creativity, connection, communion, immanence, being and becoming. Sensations are movement, softness, spaciousness, spiral like water flowing, or the moon's gentle light. Symbols associated with Jamal qualities will be the river, moon, water, a circle, or a spiral. Colors of silver, green, turquoise, and pink. And he's saying both of these energies are swirling in us all the time. But, like the other speakers have alluded to, we tend to favor one more than the other. We deny one, we affirm one. And with this inner feminine quality, he invites us to notice how the exhale lengthens when we surrender to it. So inhaling can be quite the Jalal sensation, and exhaling can be the Jamal, just longer and softer. So he spoke here about appropriation and channeling. And what he's saying here is that each type is created to channel certain divine qualities. But when we fixate from these holy ideas, we appropriate them, and then we start to claim them as, I am this. So the Enneagram 2 says, I am the loving one, instead of letting love flow through them. The 8 says, I am the strong one, instead of letting strength flow through them. That appropriation is a fixation of the ego. So it moves then from this holy idea into the fixation of the mind. And the quality you appropriate always comes from one pole, while the quality you avoid comes from the other. So in this work, he looks at 4 stages. The first stage is stuck. I'm completely identified with one pole and I don't even know it. That fixation is on autopilot. Then I move into oscillating. So now I'm woken up. I'm aware that there's another pole to it. And I'm trying the other pole. But now I'm swinging between extremes. I'm clumsy, it's hard, but it's necessary. So the 2 is trying to be assertive and it ends up being overly assertive or aggressive. The 8 is trying to be incorporative, but it just doesn't know quite how to do it. And at this point, he enacted walking on a tightrope with a pole to balance himself. And when he was doing this, he was sort of given extreme oscillations between the pole of how it moved up and how it moved down, how clumsy it was, and difficult to maintain balance. Then we move to a stage of embodiment. So here we can hold both poles with less effort. Strength doesn't contradict tenderness, for example. But in the tightrope, we're still having to watch our feet. We're not quite certain there. And then we move to transparency. So now we're no longer thinking about it. These qualities flow through us. And this is like a tightrope walk where we can look outward because the balancing has become part of them. It maps onto the unconscious incompetence, conscious incompetence, unconscious competence, or conscious competence, unconscious competence model of adult learning. He opened up to questions at the end, and there was a lot more to it around kind of Sufism, which is quite a lot to go into, but he did allow some time at the end for questions. And what I thought was quite interesting, and I just noted down some of the answers to the questions, particularly this first one, where someone said to him, "That's all good and well, but how do we do it?" And he said, well, this is often what he hears. The first question always starts with how, and in fact, it's too early for that word. The answer is observe, stay with it. Don't try to change anything. So the observation is the transformation. Marion spoke to that. Russ has spoken to that. Khalid is speaking to that. There's an overriding message of allowing, of being present. Lucille mentioned it as well, is that the transformation often happens with the observation. As soon as we become aware of a blind spot or shadow, the observance of it is what starts to shift and change it. Another answer he gave is that what we are is not achieved through effort, but it is not given except to those who put in the effort. I think that's the Sufi polarity and entanglement coming through. And then you are the universe. You are a speck of dust, and you have to hold them both. That was Khalid.
Sure, that was also really interesting. And it just reminds me of the what you started to talk with around, this the Enneagram is not something that shows us who we are, basically. It's a pattern that that kind of informs how we respond and act and feel. And this message that's coming through is around stop trying to fix it or change something, but be open and receptive to our truth and authenticity. And I just heard somebody talk about in a mindfulness practice that an empty mind is open to potential, where a fixated mind is limited to a pattern. And this really just feels like it links into that. Any questions from anybody? Any reflections?
Just to add on to what you're saying there, is that the message that comes through is to work with, not work against. To fight our type, to fight our polarity, this constant struggling is not the way to resolution. It will get us up to a shock point, but we need something else. And that something else is what Russ calls is grace, is the supreme allowing of who we are and what we are to emerge. And that will transform.
Mm. And is there a general kind of thing that happens at shock points? We give up, we think we're bad, we go back to our fixation and go, oh, you know, this is what I expected was going to happen, and it happens, instead of just kind of being open and sitting in that shock point and letting it be, or following what's the next track that's out of my comfort zone. It's out of my usual response.
And that it's surrendering to the shock point, allowing it to be here. It's part of the journey.
Some beautiful comments in the chat also just about people's experience of you know, the sharing. But I think I don't see any questions, so we can move on to the sharing of your next session with Dina. And yeah, she's Egyptian, I think, is what you shared, and what was it like hearing from her?
Dina's really cool. She's very open. So I think she had flown in from China the day before, and so she teaches all over the world. And she started by saying that, you know, her first question I think that she had when she found out she was a 6 is like, how do I change my type? And then she showed us photos of her family and who everyone is. And she said, this is my daughter. You can see she's leading from a 3 by the way she poses. And it's just had a great rapport with the group. And her talk was on the path to unity. So she was looking at what Gurdjieff and Sufi teachings say about the complete human, al-insan al-kamil. And she said that she's very interested in Sufism and she would love to do more of it, but a 7-wing prevents her from committing. So she's never got into being a Sufi. So she leverages the teachings, but she's not a Sufi. So as I said, al-insan al-kamal, my pronunciation might be off, probably is the complete human. This is the person who has become a clear mirror reflecting all divine names and attributes, including opposites. It's a fully realized person, someone who has matured spiritually, ethically, and inwardly. They are integrated and balanced, instincts, emotions, mind, and spirit aligned rather than at war. And they are a bridge between heaven and earth. The human as the meeting place of matter and spirit, living with presence and responsibility. So 2 quotes one from Gurdjieff and one from a Sufi teacher. I think he's born in Spain. And Gurdjieff says, man, in the full sense of the term, is a miniature universe. In him are all the matters of which the universe consists, the same forces, the same laws. And Ibn Abi Talib says, a little body you deem yourself, while the great universe dwells within you. So Dina says that what the core of her talk was is that we are this white transparent light that comes into life and then moves through this prism, which is our childhood, and then fractures into a whole rainbow of light. And we prefer, or we choose, one color and often repress the others to varying degrees. So mapped onto the Enneagram, it looks something like this. This white light comes in and spreads out. So Gurdjieff asserts that the human being is not a single unified self, but a plurality of disconnected, often contradictory eyes, commonly referred to as many eyes. This can be, you know, I'm hungry, I'm tired, I'm bored, I'm restless, all these little eyes going on. And there's a lack of unity. A human being is not one, but a collection of eyes, each with its own desires and often conflicting views. Characterized by mechanical behavior, and these eyes are not conscious. They are reactions to external stimuli, acting like a machine. And says this produces a sort of a sense of wake and sleep. Because these I's take turns ruling and have no permanent center, people live in a dreamlike state, unable to control themselves or remember their true selves. The goal of the work then is, the aim is to move from this multiplicity towards a unified I by observing all the small I's, understanding their automatic nature, and developing self-remembering. The three centers, these I's often stem from the lack of connection between the three main centers of the human machine. Intellect, our thought; emotion, our feeling; and physical, our moving and instinctive nature. Ibn Arabi says, the complete human, every human being has the innate potential to become the complete man. Every servant is given a portion of the station of the complete human according to their capacity. No one is originally veiled from the station. Rather, people veil themselves by their own selves. Arabi says the complete man is capable of receiving divine manifestation in every form and witness the truth in every opposite. He possesses a vast spiritual capacity, able to perceive unity within multiplicity, light within shadow, the divine in every form. So what Dina did here is that she then used the process Enneagram to map the parallel ladders of Gurdjieff and the Sufis. So what she's saying is at point one, Gurdjieff sees this point here as man numbers 1 to 3. And what those numbers are self-praise, social, and sexual as instincts. He didn't rank them above each other, but they are what he'd call man 1, 2, and 3. The al-nafs, or the ego, here is seen as the ego obeying self, the sleeping human. So at this point is where we all start. The command in self, this is our impulses driving us, and we obey without awareness. This is what Gurdjieff called the machine. When we move to point 2, this is where we've oscillated, as Khalid says, but in this diagram, it's where we become the blaming self, the human who's split inside. We've noticed the polarity, the fragmentation, the multiple I's, the contradictions. We split, we can see the problem, but we can't resolve it. This is what Gurdjieff calls man 4, the person caught between ego and essence. And as the process shows us, there's a shock point. So this human who's now woken up to these polarities in themselves and the other side of themselves that they can see, but they can't do anything about it, hits the shock point. And this is where she's labeled it stop. And that's kind of the, directly referencing Gurdjieff's exercise of stop. He says, when you're walking around, stop and take note of every polarity that's going on inside you. Just note it and punctuate your day with those. So this is the tension of seeing your fragmented self, but being unable to fix it. And now you need something else to intervene. So you stop, observe, probably suffer, and create space for a reconciling force to enter. You can't push past this with more effort. This is where grace must come in. So grace enters in a form. It might be through a prayer, it might be through a religious practice, it might be through a mentor, but however it is, this reconciling force enters and the spiritual heart starts to open. This is the higher emotional center, and this is where it brings alignment, activates, and this is where the virtues start to live in you naturally rather than being performed. You're beginning to find equilibrium between the opposing forces that were tearing you apart at point 2. Gurdjieff calls this man 5. So then we get to the reassured self, the human who has controlled his inferior being. This is a disidentification, after disidentification, this deep assurance arrives. This is not a false assurance of the ego. I'm fine, everything's fine. It's a genuine inner peace. The naf that is at rest because it has surrendered to the need to control, claim, defend. So the naf is another word for ego. Ego is no longer running the show. You've put your ego underneath your feet, Stina says. But then we hit shock point 6. So this shock point at disidentification is, we've done all this work. We're now assured we are the human who's in control of his inferior being. And then the ego surfaces again. And this ego is at a critical stage. You've had this spiritual experience, a real opening and real transformation, but then ego wants to claim it. I achieved this. I am spiritual. I have arrived. This is the shock point at 6. It wants to disidentify from that, to let go of the spiritual ego, to stop claiming the progress. Progress is mine. Without the second surrender, you get stuck in a spiritual pride, and called this I have arrived. And this is where your journey can stall. So again, this seeks an intervention. It just seeks divine guidance, a higher force, a mentor, or some external force to come in and carry you over that shock point. Arriving at the next shock point is what we call the satisfied self. So this satisfaction is not a sense of complacency, but it's a deep contentment with what is. The person is no longer seeking, striving, or grasping. Instead, they're at peace with their reality as it is, including its opposites and its contractions and contradictions. When we arrive at the delighted self, so not only is this person satisfied, but now the divine is delighted with them. There's a reciprocal quality here. The person is aligned with reality, and reality is flowing through them freely. The channel is clear. The divine names are manifesting through the person without obstruction. And then this arrives at the complete human, manifesting all divine names. This is the summit. The person has become the transparent mirror, reflecting all the divine names and attributes. This is Ibn Arabi's Al-Insan Al-Kamil, the complete human. All the colors integrated back into white light. The prism is reversed, as the header says, the complete human, manifesting all divine names. So that's wonderful, and it's an incredible unfolding and quite aspirational. The reality is that in 60 years of life, I estimate that we will spend 3 minutes in pure essence. So the work is really about increasing those moments, understanding where we're at and what might be going on for that stage. Observing helps us shift, being open to asking for help, whether that comes from the divine or from mentorship or allyship, but just being open to that, knowing that we will hit shock points in our journey, and there are places and ways around those shock points or through them. So we did an exercise with Dina to close out, which was a chanting practice. And what she's done here is she's brought in the divine names of God as polarities. And the chant is to chant one side of the polarity and then the other, particularly for your type. So the 9 would be Ya Latif, Ya Kahar, Ya Latif, Ya Kahar, Ya Latif, Ya Kahar. And it's just a mantra that keeps going and rolling and rocking and rolling and rolling and rolling. And it's quite extraordinary. She had the whole audience participating in this. So we were all chanting with her probably for about 10 minutes or so. And it's quite extraordinary to have all that vibration moving through you, with knowing that there is this polarity that you're welcoming in. And I think that is that. Charisse.
Sure. What was that? I mean, I think I heard a video, a voice clip of the chanting in the room when this exercise was happening, and it was quite powerful and uplifting, not knowing and not being there, but that just that energy that came from the chanting. And then go for it. Sorry.
I was going to say it was amazing, and just the I think that's what was so incredible about the experience, is that we can watch a lot of these talks online, but actually being in presence with other practitioners, and Lucille spoke to being part of a community. It's an incredible experience. I mean, there was so much going on. I think I could go to the conference 3 times over and still not see everything. At any one stage, there were 4 different rooms. in session. There were beautiful breakout groups where there was lots of interaction with people. She mentioned the VR sessions. Ingrid Hurwitz delivered an incredible session in the main hall as well on no bad parts. Bring in Richard Schwartz's work on IFS into the Enneagram, and people after that said that they had a therapeutic session. Several people that she invited volunteers to participate were amazing. They demonstrated live panels. Lucille mentioned the drumming, so that was a gala dinner we got taken out to, which was a riot. I mean, every person in the restaurant got drums, and they just led this huge circle of drumming. So it really is. It's quite special to be immersed in this, and it's about, I would say, between 250 and 270 people attending. So it's quite intimate as well, and the Egyptians are really, really warm, and they're really kind people. They want you to have a good time. There's hospitality and caring and intensity, and all of it at once. So it's a really special experience. Yeah. And perhaps just to add how well resourced I felt on a sort of an educational level through these community of practice sessions, through Euphoria's courses and teachings. The information that's available to us as a community is really, really fantastic. And I was just noting that, as particularly in some of the breakout sessions I went to, how well versed we are in this conversation, in this language.
Right. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. And just from your, taking a step back and looking, there's these beautiful photos of your experience. But has anything changed in terms of how you work with the Enneagram from this conference?
I think it's in progress of changing. I've been very interested in the spiritual dimension of it. Most of my work centers around the Enneagram of personality, and I don't want to let that go. I find it incredibly useful and an excellent tool to communicate on. But there's this real sense of presence and allowing and just holding. So familiarizing myself with what is in the field through observation, through intuition, through emotion, and through intellect, and holding all of that, just really working with reactivity. And I know certainly there are parts of me that I want to push away, that I don't like, I don't want to shun, and just increasingly accepting or taking up that invitation to be with it, to be with the breadth of who we are and how we are. And everything is in its place, and it's just moving with grace.
Yeah, amazing. Really inspiring. And thank you for sharing so generously about your experience and your reflections, and weaving such a clear thread through the richness of these speakers. And I'm just wondering if anybody else has got some questions. We've got 5 minutes left, and also these photos, I mean, they are beautiful. I know there's a new museum that was also opened in Egypt, which was quite spectacular, it sounded like.
Yeah, I didn't put too many photos up of that. This one in the bottom corner here is from a museum. That's where Tutankhamun's organs are kept. So when they mummify, they remove all the organs, but they keep lungs, stomach, liver, and kidneys, which are all organs involved in transformation. And then they keep them in special jars next to them, which is, it's fascinating. And the actual Tutankhamun display there is, it's out of this world. Really, really incredible.
So a real call to go visit and go to the next conference there, just to experience the people, the culture, and immerse into this magical and mystical side of the Enneagram, which is quite spiritual. I see people have been really encouraged and also inspired by your sharing. Thinking about shock points in a way, and life processes. Thank you again, and thanks for everybody for being here and sharing your own reflections and questions. And I look forward to seeing you at our next session.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much. It was
Thanks so much.
fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thanks
It
for
was
an
lovely.
amazing
Thanks, Andrew.
session.
Thanks,
Thank
Louise.
you. Thank you. Yeah, I can share my
Wonderful.
notes. I think if
We'll
you
share
want.
your slides. Yeah, we'll share slides. We might have to take out what's trademarked, but we will share slides. So thanks, Andrew, for that as well.
Thank you, Andrew. Magnificent.
Pleasure. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for your
Thanks
Thanks so
support.
much. Thank you so much.
Bye.